So what we want to do now in Blender is we want to do some sculpting. Now, for you guys, it's going to depend on your computer, your software, right? So if some of you guys are working on doing it on your devices, those aren't terribly powerful, but like we said, I've been able to get Blender working on my school-provided Surface Pro. So you should, at this point, all be working in Blender, or if you have Maya Mudbox, that's fine too. Um, Really, this is just sculpting. So a lot of you guys that have got Maya Mudbox running are probably used to the sculpting from Mudbox. You can always take this into Blender, right? It's kind of one of those things. Um, but yeah, we want to sculpt in Blender. There's no real prerequisite on how hard or how far you have to push sculpting. I do want some sculpting for like muscle forms, maybe a little bit of wrinkling and creasing. If you do want to get some kind of stencil based or stamp based texturing, that's fine too. But really, realistically, it's just more getting some sculpting and getting a normal map baked out, so that way you at least have been playing with and have some fundamental ideas of how that works. Um, so what sculpting is this is how we get all of the high resolution details on a model, right? We kind of already get to see it somewhat on our last project, right? Our spaceship, which you were all involved with. We did bump mapping, right? We showed how bump mapping worked. Well, bump mapping is good at doing heavily image-based texturing, so things that do lots of stencils or stamps. Those kind of have like an up-down kind of variation, right? Kind of like, the white of the image makes it look raised, the black of the image makes it look pushed in, or bump mapping. So a bump map would honestly create quite a good result, just like sculpting would with that kind of stuff. So if you're using heavily stencil stamp-based stuff. When it comes to things like fabric folds, when it comes to muscle tone, bone ridges, wrinkles, stuff that's not so much kind of black and white and bumpy, kind of like with image-based stuff, bump mapping just doesn't work nearly as well. And that's where sculpting is really, really powerful and really, really useful. It's much better at capturing that kind of detail and baking it out with more nuance, more subtlety. The nice thing about sculpting is it actually does the image-based stuff like stencils and stamps very well also. So kind of sculpting can do it all really well, whereas bump mapping kind of runs into the limitation of once you get away from image-based textures, it doesn't handle that stuff or make it look nearly as nice. So the way a lot of detailing is done nowadays in 3D models is through sculpting. And that's what we're going to play with here. Now, the nice thing is there's lots of sculpting software out there. Of course, we got to see it and dabble with a little bit of Mudbox. Of course, Mudbox does 3D projection painting. Believe it or not, Blender has 3D projection painting too. We'll be seeing that in some of the later videos before the end of the year. But really, this week's videos, this one and the next one, are going to be about sculpting and baking a normal map. You don't have to go too hard on this stuff, right? Really, we've spent a lot more time modeling it because the modeling itself can take a little while to build a good base mesh. The last video you saw, UV wrapping, doesn't take that long. And, there's only so much time we have. We started a couple weeks late from what we normally would because of the distance learning itself. So don't feel like you have to push sculpting maybe quite as far as I do in the videos, but I do want you guys to kind of do some basic sculpting. So what I want to do is I want to start and get us started playing with sculpting today. We'll do another video. We'll have a little more sculpting and then baking normal maps out. But that's what we want to focus on, is some sculpting. I just want to kind of give a little bit of basics for that. But sculpting entails having lots of polygons, right? That's really the only way you can sculpt all the little details, wrinkles, fabric folds in, is if you have hundreds of thousands or millions of polygons. Obviously, that's not going to run in a video game, and that's not even really going to be what a film animator is going to work with, right? They'll work with a denser mesh than a game model would be, but still the really fine details are done at rendering. And with games, it's baked into the actual texture, the normal map. All right, so in this case, what I'm going to do is, of course, you can see over here we've got our scene collection area. It's kind of like a Blender's version of Outliner, right? And of course, you saw I labeled these the other day. The nice thing is it's easy just to double click, right? If you just double click on it, you can give it a name, all right? In this case, I named one armor, and that's kind of got the eyeballs and the clothing armor. And I can click on that eyeball just like in Blender, in Mudbox, and just turn the visibility off for that other view. Now, one of the other things we want to do at this point is this is our UV Unwrapped one, right? If I went to UV editing and we hit 4 for object mode and I click on the object, this should be the UV one, Control UV, yeah. And then we'll hit 3 to go into face mode, right? You can see the UVs are there, right? The UV Unwrapping we did from the last video. And as we saw, Blender's got quite good UV wrapping tools, right? Kind of largely up there with Maya's in terms of ease of use and quality. So remember, though, usually to see the wire the UVs easily, you select the object, right? 4 is object mode. You click on the object, hit 3 for face mode, then you'll kind of get to see the UVs there. But in this case, we're going to go back to modeling. I just want to make sure you guys know that we do want to have the UVs for this, right? That is important because the sculpting we're going to do is going to be generated into a texture map that's going to match those UVs. So basically, at some point, you have to have a lower res model with good UVs to bake the normal map, extract the normal information from a higher resolution, right, a mesh with more polygons to the lower one. So remember, some of these videos are just the lecture, right, the concepts. And many of you guys are already familiar with this because you've been with me for, like almost 2 years now. Some of you guys aren't as familiar, and many of you guys those are juniors. You'll probably have me next year, so we'll get to go into this more and things like that. So we're going to get plenty more practice with this. But there's only so much we can do at the end of the year in the distance learning right now. But the nice thing is Blender actually has a pretty complete tool set, and it's pretty cool that way. So what we need to do is a couple of things. One, in this case, we don't really need the mirror modifier anymore, right? The actual sculpting tools kind of work with their own symmetry for sculpting. So what I'm going to do is, and this is something that's good for you guys to know about in general, we kind of saw it with our subdivisional surface, right? Previously when we did this. It's in the videos, guys. Go back and watch those videos. But if you have like a subdivisional surface modifier, right? It'll be its own little modifier in here. And you'll notice that usually these modifiers like mirror and subdivisional surface have something called apply. And what that does is it makes it real. Instead of being a modifier that you can turn off, right? You can actually apply it. And in this case, it's kind of letting us know we have to be in edit mode. So we go 4 for object, right? And we click on the object. But you have to be in 4 object mode, right? And then we can hit apply. And you'll notice that there's no longer that modifier there anymore, right? So if I hit 3 to go back to face mode, you'll notice that when we select, it's not going to select both sides. So that mirror is now kind of gone. It's been applied, and so you don't see it in the modifier stack anymore, and it's all one seamless object now. So that's always kind of good to do because the mirror modifier has a weird way of working when you're in sculpting, right? And that's one of the reasons why you can't really do sculpting and box modeling that well in Mudbox or in Blender. Really, the only package I've ever used specifically that I know can do this well is Modo. Blender has good sculpting tools, but you can't really play with them that well with the box modeling tools. And I'm kind of waiting for everybody else to do that. Modo kind of is way ahead of the curve on that one. But Blender sculpting tools are quite good. And as we've seen, we have retopo tools, right, with our poly build. So that mirror modifier has been applied. So remember, your modifiers are just that blue wrench, and you can actually apply them, right? Now in this case, it's important that we have, right at the get-go, a low-resolution version of this, right? So one of the things we can do is, there's the body, right? And, we can hit 4 for object mode, click on it. And if you right-click on the body in here, right, you'll see that there are actually some options like copy, right? And then I could right-click. I'll probably just go back up to collection here, right-click, and you can see there's paste. And you can actually paste that other object into the collection. So collection you can kind of think of like a scene, right? This is basically Blender's version of outliner, right? So we can actually copy this guy, and of course we can double click on it. We can call it body low. There we go, and that'll be the low resolution version of this for sculpting. I'll actually even show you how to do cage, which is really easy. We just copy the body low, so we have a cage that we can use for the sculpting, and then the low res itself. But we do want 2 versions of this, right? So you right-click on body, and you can copy it. And then if you go back up to the collection itself, you can right-click, paste it, Control-Z and Control-V, right? Actually do that, like you'd expect in Photoshop. And of course, I can turn the eyeball off for this guy, because we don't need to see the body low. We just want it to be there. So this one will be the high-res version. We'll do our sculpting on, and then we can bake it to match the low-res version. That's usually quite important for baking any kind of normal map. It's a little different in ZBrush and Mudbox because they're using the actual multi-resolution sculpting to transfer the data. That also means you can't do cage control and other things like that. But if you're in like Maya or Blender or Modo, you actually have to have 2 objects, right? A low-res version and the high-resolution sculpt version. So in this case, I copied that, which is great. It's good to know that you can copy objects if you need to. And to know a little bit more about like the scene collection area, right? The scene area. This is kind of, like I said, Blender's version of Outliner. And the eyeballs can allow you to turn the visibility off. All right. So in this case, we make sure to select the object, because 4, remember, is object mode, right? The right here, though, this little pull down menu, the right there, edit mode, right, goes to vertex, or just edit mode, but 1 also does vertex, right? So for me, I just kind of understand that 1 will do vertex, 2 will do edge, 3 will do face, 4 is object. They are right here. Sculpt mode, right? Also there, so if you ever wanted to use sculpting tools while you're in modeling, you can just hit 5, and you're still in the modeling viewport, and you can shape a little bit. And we saw that in some of our earlier videos. But in this case, we'll go to 4 for object. There we go. Because what we want to do is we want to add a modifier to this, right? Today is really going to be kind of introduction, show you some basic sculpting. We're not going to try to do everything today. We'll do a little bit more in our next video and bake out stuff. And I'm not going to go too nuts with the sculpting, right? Because we really did spend a lot of time building a model, UV unwrapping a model. Sculpting and painting is the kind of thing you can do, get some good basics down without like spending tons and tons of time. They do tend to be a little easier because you don't have to worry about edge loops or proper UV unwrapping. You're just doing the art, right? But what we do is we need a multi-resolution modifier to this. So we have the ability to kind of apply sculpt and do sculpt work on it. So we, of course, make sure, 4 for object mode, click on the object. The blue wrench, right? Because there are these little tabs right here, the blue wrench. And we go to the add modifier, pull down, click on that. And instead of doing a subdivisional surface, you'll see a couple up, because that's where mirror's at, right? And subdivisional surface. So if you want your smooth preview, right, it's subdivisional surface. It does work a little bit differently in here. Smooth preview in Maya is a subdivisional surface, but the way they are applied in Blender in Maya is a bit different. This works more like 3D Studio Max in that respect, although it works better than 3D Studio Max's. Maya and Modo work a little more similar, where it's just a toggle you turn on and you have full symmetry functionality that works great in both packages. But multi-resolution is right there. So we click on multi-resolution, and it applies a multi-resolution modifier. And what we could do is you'll see that there is a subdivide right here, right? And we're not going to worry about going up and down the resolutions too much because it's not so much of an issue we have to worry about. What we could do is we could hit subdivide. What that'll do is that'll actually subdivide to 1 level, so it's got more polygons there. One of the interesting things you'll notice, though, is if I hit 3 for face mode, you'll notice your low resolution is still there, right? And then if I go back to object mode, right, and we subdivide again, you'll notice it's actually kind of resing up the model, right? It's actually adding more polygons. So we'll go up to like about 4. That should be okay. My computer can handle it fairly well. I have a feeling some of you guys' computers might max out at 4. Do what you can, right? If your computer is constantly crashing when you push it up to like 5 or 6 and you're getting up to millions of polygons, go to hundreds of thousands, right? It's more that you're doing some sculpting, that you're baking some normal maps out. You can go more stylized, but I do want to see some sculpting forms. But what that's doing is that's subdividing it up. In fact, you'll notice the preview button, if I go down, you can kind of actually see it goes back to low resolution. See how it changes a little bit, right? That's kind of like your multiple resolutions. That's what's cool about this sculpting. This is the way Modo sculpting works, the way Mudbox's sculpting works, the way ZBrush's sculpting works. What they're doing is they're actually giving you multiple resolutions. You're subdividing just like you would hit smooth in Maya or apply subdivisional surface modifier in Blender. It subdivides it, right? It takes each quad, breaks it into 4 smaller quads, and then it does it again, then it does it again, so that you get to hundreds, thousands, millions of polygons. The difference here, and in all high-resolution sculpting applications, is you can go back down to the lower levels, right? We're probably not going to need to worry about that too much on this project, but you can. And that's the biggest difference, right? And we still have the original low res. So now that we've got that taken care of, right, and we know to add the multi-resolution subdivisional surface modifier and subdivide a couple times, get us 3 or 4, maybe 5, depending on how far you guys want to push it. You'll notice, of course, we have our layouts up here. It's one of the great things I love about the Blender 2.8 series is the overall rework of the interface, and even how in-depth industry compatible is really made it quite an excellent user-friendly piece of software. It's always been powerful and capable. For me, it wasn't where I wanted it to be in workflow until the 2.8 series. But you'll see there's the modeling menu. We've been using that a lot, right? But there's also, and we saw UV editing, right? in our other video last week, but there's a sculpting section too. And when we turn on sculpting, you'll notice it's already got its own symmetry on. So it already turns on symmetry right here, right? This is not the exact same thing as the mirror modifier, right? Mirror modifier is honestly a lot more reliable when you're doing regular modeling. Even though it's not perfect, we see the seams can pop off down the center. But when you're just doing sculpting, this actual little symmetry button right here works great. So nice things when we actually go to sculpting, it automatically turns symmetry on, even if we don't have the mirror modifier, right? There's no mirror modifier here. Of course, remember the very top little button right up here, the one that looks like a screwdriver and a crescent or a regular wrench. That's your actual properties for your brushes, and you see you have a bunch of sculpting brushes here, right? Blender sculpting tools are quite good. So you actually have Mudbox and ZBrush in Blender. So there we go. Of course, a couple of quick keys that are good to know. The brackets, right? They're next to P and kind of right above your Enter. They kind of look like, you know, kind of little, almost like little claw hands, right? Those can go up and down your units in 10, right? S will also kind of adjust your size of your brush as well. They're right here though too. You'll see when you're in the sculpting menu, your tool options are also right up here as well. So you get them here, but you also get them here. There's your strength for how much it's going to sculpt out, and there's your radius, right? So you can kind of turn those up and down a little bit if you want to. You know, 0.2. So you have a couple of controls here and a couple of quick keys. In this case, we don't really want to use grab. We'll probably just play with the normal draw. Although, you know, they have inflate and you have blob. You do actually have masking tools here. We probably won't really do masking on this project, or maybe I'll do it a little bit on the armor. We'll kind of see how it's going because there's only so much time, and we're new to it with Blender, right? So some things I might kind of go over as options for you guys to have, but you don't have to do them. So draw could be a good place to start. We'll bring the strength down for draw, and you see how you can kind of just left click drag in there. I'm sure there's a quick key for the strength amount. I don't know it off the top of my head. Of course, the brackets can make that go bigger or smaller. S and then left mouse drag can make it go bigger or smaller. And you'll notice that we can kind of, you know, use all of our normal navigation, Alt left, Alt middle, Alt right mouse button to move our camera, right? So we talk about camera move, camera rotate, right? That's camera rotate, Alt left mouse button. Camera move, Alt middle mouse button. Camera zoom, Alt right mouse button, right? That's what we talk about when we talk about navigation. Now the nice thing is this uses the basic same quick keys that Mudbox does, right? So if I hold down Control, it will actually push in the sculpt, just like Mudbox does, right? Or ZBrush. So you see how I can kind of go in here? If I hold down Shift, I can kind of smooth it out, right? So I can kind of smooth these out a little bit. And regular left mouse button will pull it out. You see how it's kind of actually pulling out the surface? I can, of course, make my brush a little bigger here. Hold down Control to push in, right? Kind of maybe develop a little bit of the obliques there. Left mouse button, pull out. Shift to smooth. Now, any of you guys that have actually done some sculpting in Mudbox or done some sculpting in ZBrush, which, you know, some of you guys haven't, some of you guys, at least Mudbox, have, you'll notice those are the same quick keys because things like Control and Shift for inversing and smoothing are pretty universal. In fact, ZBrush uses everything that I've ever used uses Shift for smooth when you're in any sculpting brush. ZBrush will use Alt for its inverse because it doesn't use Alt in the same way for navigation as a lot of other software does. But Modo, Mudbox, Blender, even Maya, when you choose to use its sculpting tools, which don't have multi-resolution, so even though it has these sculpting tools, it doesn't really have the multi-resolution to fully support high-res sculpting. Those are pretty universal quick keys, right? So Control will inverse to allow you to push in, right? So I can kind of develop a little bit of some abdominals here. Left mouse button will push out a little bit, right? Shift will smooth. And you'll see that what we can do is we can start to add in these kind of little details, right? And you can go in here and kind of maybe put a little of a nipple on there, right? And Troll doesn't really have a shirt. We can give a little bit of an Adam's apple if we wanted to. All right, and I'm just doing this with my mouse. I have a Wacom tablet here, but I'm, you know, really showing concepts off more than anything. So we can easily come in here and do some cool little detailing of forms, right? Now, sometimes when you're sculpting, you might see it kind of pull through on the other side. If that becomes an issue, what you can do is go to brush right here, and you can actually tell it to do front faces only. So it'll only sculpt the faces that it's directly touching. Any faces that are kind of right behind it in a very thin area won't be sculpting. In this case, I don't think it's going to be too much of an issue here. So besides, I can use control to kind of push in here a little bit, left kind of pull out, and I can really kind of develop this ear form a little bit better, right? We can hold down control to kind of define that a little more. Shift to smooth it, right? So sculpting is kind of this push and pull, right? You hold down control to kind of push in a little bit. So I can kind of use this to define the jawline a little bit better. Left mouse button to pull out, but shift. You notice how I'm using shift to kind of soften or smooth out areas, right? So shift kind of basically softens the areas you're sculpting with, right? So left mouse button will pull out away from the surface. Shift will smooth to kind of soften or blend. And as we've seen, control will kind of inverse. So you can kind of develop some forms here. And bring out the brow ridge a little bit more, right? There we go. We can bring out a little bit more of a nostril. Make my brush size a little smaller. Hold down control to inverse to kind of actually create the nostril, right? If I want, I can kind of define the nasal labial fold a little bit better. There we go. Hold down shift to smooth. And you see how you can start to do some cool sculpting here. I can hold down control to maybe define the lips a little better there. There we go. And we could start to really kind of define this form and shape better. If you wanted to start to get some kind of wrinkling in, there are actually other brushes besides just your draw brush, right? You'll see there's clay strips. We're not even going to go over most of these. It's more about giving you guys some good fundamentals. You guys can always explore and play with these later on. But you will see that there is a crease brush, right? It's kind of in these blue ones. And when we turn that one on, you'll notice it kind of does this little bit of a crease kind of fold, which can be pretty cool for wrinkles, right? And depending how big the brush size is, right, it'll kind of make a bigger or smaller crease. So I can kind of come in here and I can start to kind of crease in or wrinkle out the kind of the eyes there a little bit. There we go. So in this case, make sure you have a pretty small brush size, right, to really get the kind of crease showing up more. Of course, we can hold down shift to smooth and soften and blend it more. But you'll see that there's a kind of neat, pretty neat host of brushing tools in here, right, that can allow you to do some neat stuff. So I can get a little bit of wrinkling in there. Like I said, shift to kind of soften the edges. You don't want it to be too pronounced or too sharp. It usually blends more naturally in the areas. And even this scrape can help you kind of do a little bit of kind of work to the lips if we wanted to a little bit here. And we can make these pretty pronounced because, you know, he's a troll. So we'll probably have some pretty creased out lips there. We can enhance the creases there a little bit more if we wanted to. Maybe even give them a little bit of crow's feet, right? So remember, you have some cool brushes in here just with the regular draw and crease brushes, right? And this will start to give you the ability to do some neat stuff. Like we can give them a little bit of kind of head wrinkles there a little bit. Now, depending on how detailed you want this to hold up, right? You might need to go back to your, the blue wrench modifier and subdivide one more time to give it a little more detail. I'm going to try to keep this guy not from going too insane in terms of polygon levels, just because, you know, we don't need to get it ridiculously detailed, and you guys might not have a good enough computer to really push this as far. But there we go, that should work pretty well. Maybe make my brush size a little bigger. You will notice that there is, I'm trying to remember where it's at here, somewhere in here. Just gotta look for it. There it is, smooth. There's actually a brush by itself that is just your smooth brush, so you don't have to hold down shift, right? Has its own strength. So if you don't want to keep holding down shift as you're working on other stuff, there is an actual dedicated smooth brush, right? It's just that shift is the quick key from every brush in here to smooth. so that you do some creasing smooth without having to switch tools. That's how important smoothing is to the process of sculpting, guys, right? You're often going in and sculpting and then smoothing, sculpting and then smoothing. It isn't just sculpt to make it really lumpy. You got to smooth it to kind of blend and make things look more natural and better defined. So now you can start to see we can kind of get some neat sculpting. This is the kind of stuff that bump mapping is just not going to do as well. Now, in this case, I'm going to do a quick save scene as. I want to talk about one more thing for you guys. Let me go back to where I've been saving my stuff. Let's see, desktop, Blender stuff, and let's call this Troll Sculpt. Remember, saving a couple different versions at different stages is always good, right? So, you know, I've got Troll, I've got the Troll UV one, right? This is a crab guy I worked on way earlier when I was first playing with Blender 2.8, just experimenting with stuff. So I'll hit Save As, and I'll save it as a Blender file, Troll Sculpt. That way I have that as a separate file. That way if I ever need to, I can go back to the originals without losing them. One last thing I want to point out to you guys that you can use or not use when you're in the sculpting one is we notice, and I've talked about this, I started talking about this more when we did the UV video, but remember you have wireframe here, right? And you can see how dense the actual geometry is now because of the wireframe mode. There's your normal kind of shaded mode, right? Viewport shading. And then of course this will actually show kind of a different level of sculpting. We'll keep shaded on the regular viewport shading because that's solid mode, and then you'll see that this one is material preview, so it's going to show your full material. In this case we don't really want that for right now. But the solid shade, right? So that's like wireframe, smooth shade, kind of like 4 and 5 in Maya. But you see in this area though, there is this little kind of little pull down, like it's kind of like a not quite completed triangle that points down. If I click on that, you'll notice that sculpting sets its material lighting stuff to be matte cap, and it gives it this kind of like more dynamic look to the shading, right? So if I was to click on this and I was just to turn it back to the studio stuff, right, this looks a little different. Now what's cool though is you see right below matte cap, you click on this and you have a couple of other matte tap previews. You've probably maybe have dabbled with this a little bit in Mudbox if you've ever seen ZBrush. You can actually change your matte cap to be different stuff, right? Not sure why you'd want like car paint for this guy, but you know, you could do it. So you can actually kind of use a couple of different matte cap effects if you want to kind of give it a different look as you're working on stuff. The nice thing is the first one right here is that original, right? So it's kind of up to you on which you prefer. But from doing sculpting, a lot of people prefer matte caps because it kind of it creates this kind of interesting shadowing without having a huge real-time performance, and it kind of creates a shiny effect that shows the form off pretty well when you're sculpting. So you might find that pretty neat, interesting to use. You don't have to, right? You can just kind of keep up with the default gray. It's kind of up to you on which one you want to work with. All right, I think that'll probably be great for an intro to sculpting. We'll do a little more, and then I'll show you how to bake the normal map down next video. All right.